working.
It's working.
Yeah.
Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another PGWiP. We're reaching the end of the spring term already. Only next week is left, so means also already almost 3 months of boycott of Sandhouse, which doesn't seem to go pretty well. Today I read that there is more fighting going on than constructive negotiation to improve the outsourced workers' conditions. The branch secretary of the IWGB union is kind of attacked for promoting the boycott at seminars in the university. And it's now threatened with deliberate actions, kind of threatening his job, etc. So anyway, doesn't seem too colorful. But having said that, let's turn to the seminar itself today, which, well, because boycott is still in Bedford Square, in Bedford Room. Today we have Simona Martorana, who did her bachelor's and master's in the University of Trento in Italy. Had some trips, I think, to Freiburg for half a year during her bachelor's, and also half a year studied during her master's at the Columbia University. All correct? Okay, very good. Did her bachelor's in classics and master's in philology and literary criticism, and then started her PhD in Durham. PhD thesis is Women, Heroines, Mothers, Motherhood in Ovid.
Yes. Great. I'm very. Thank you. I'm struck by the fact. Oh,
I will also mention the title of your talk, which is connected, I think, to your PhD thesis. So she will talk today about with a talk with the following title: Nescio, Quid, Certe, Medea, Maius, Agit. Pardon my French. Medea's construction of a new heroic identity in Ovid's Herodes 12. So the floor is yours, Simona.
Yeah, so thank you. First of all, yeah, I would like to thank the organizers for actually this opportunity to give a paper here. I think that it's really useful, like, to get feedback, especially. So I think I would like to say, before starting my paper, is that actually I gave 2 earlier versions of this paper. One in October.
Share the screen
here
so people could see.
Okay, is it working?
Yes.
Can I go? Here in London, and another version in Germany, in Freiburg, at a conference where we were talking about how to use modern theory to interpret ancient texts. So I think that a couple of people who were in London last October, we remarked the similarities, but also the differences. So I think this is the very last version of my paper, which is a part of a chapter of my doctoral thesis. So please, please, please give me feedback, and your observations are very, very welcome. So I will start by providing some context of my research, and I will make some remarks on, like, my methodology and my theoretical approach, and then I will move to the main topic of the paper, which is Medea in Herodes 12, indeed. So let's start. The Epistolae Heroidum have been handed down to us as a collection of letters authored by Ovid at the end of the 1st century BC. These epistles are staged as love letters written by female characters from mythology to their partners. In terms of genre, the Heroides constitute a blend of epistolography, elegy, and tragedy, but their peculiarity is that they make the female side of the story speak subjectively. The Heroides have been neglected for a long time by Ovidian scholars, who stigmatized them as repetitive in patterns and deficient in originality. Wilkinson, for instance, has stated, The single heroides are a uniform plum pudding with a fair mixture of glittering rings and sixpences. The first slice is appetizing enough, but each further slice becomes colder and less digestible, until the only incentive for going on is the prospect of coming across an occasional ring or sixpence. So this is not exactly a positive judgment. This work, however, and luckily I would say, has undergone a revaluation in the last decades, and especially in most recent times, has been profitably examined through categories pertaining to modern literary criticism, such as, for instance, intertextuality and intertextuality, as well as through psychological or gender-based approaches. And the three most important works in this respect, which you should have on your handout, are Lindem 2003, Spensu 2003, and Fulkerson 2005. So I will make a very short digression on actually my theoretical approach. Lindem, Spensu, and Fulkerson, which of course are the scholars I've just mentioned, certainly have demonstrated that modern theoretical approaches can be profitably applied to heroides and more generally to the study of ancient texts. Although these works appear successful and manage to investigate the heroides from a different perspective, providing those new insights into this Ovidian work, they are not unproblematic. The application of a modern theoretical framework, as well as contemporary categories to the ancient text and materials, gives rise, in fact, to some issues and questions. The most compelling among these questions is whether we can actually label, according to our modern categories, literary or artistic works produced more than 2000 years ago, as well as evaluating historical processes happened in a so distant context from the one we are used to. More specifically and relevant to this paper, the main issue concerns the application of gender theory and psychological approaches to a collection of elegiac epistles written by a Latin poet around 1615 BC, that are the heroides, of course. As a first point, one can say that human attitudes and behaviors are somehow characterized by the same main patterns, regardless of their relevant historical and geographical context. Of course, if the circumstances change, the attitudes will change accordingly, but always consistently with respect to the context. So, for instance, the response to unrequited love or to an unhappy and ill-fated love relationship will be marked by the same main features throughout time and space, while still being affected by different concomitant conditions. These conditions, however, are accidental. The substantial elements will remain unchanged. A study of the context, thus, may help to understand why certain reactions or responses have developed, but a different context does not prevent from applying the same interpretative framework to similar phenomena. In other words, and more substantially, modern or contemporary psychological categories or gender theories can be legitimately applied to the reaction of the abandoned heroines in Ovid's heroides. This approach does not imply that the literary or historical context is overlooked. By contrast, the context itself, although it may appear very far from ours, cooperates with more recent theories to uncover and explore the angles of these texts. The deep analysis and understanding of the text and the exhaustive knowledge of the context can be said, thus, to be necessary conditions for applying pointedly modern theory to ancient works. As another point, as the context of this text, and ancient text of works more generally, is different from the one we have experienced so far or are used to, one can say that already we apply unconsciously our mental categories as well as labels to a different cultural framework while simply reading for the first time or interpreting ancient sources. The fact that we add modern theory, therefore, represents only a further step in our hermeneutical attempt to understand the materials we are looking at. In respect of Ovid's poetry, for instance, one can easily talk about Ovidian intertextuality, and in this respect, if you look at the so-called Cambridge Pisa school, such as Casali, Barchesi, Ardis works, this is basically what I'm referring to when I talk about Ovidian intertextuality. Now, this is now a widely accepted way to look at the cross-references as well as allusive interplay which characterize Ovid's entire poetic production. Intertextuality, however, is a modern category firstly coined by Kristeva, and cannot be said to be intrinsic or peculiar of Ovidian or more generally ancient texts. Nonetheless, intertextuality is now considered as a familiar concept as well as a usual and useful category to look at Ovidian works. As for other similar examples, a psychological interpretation of many Euripidean characters from Freud on, or an anthropological approach to Greek and or Roman religion has now become customary. Why then should we be prevented from using other kinds of approaches drawn from modern theory? The way in which I propose to look at Heroides, therefore, is meant to take into account the contemporary context of these epistles, as mentioned. At the same time, however, I significantly apply gender theories as well as other relevant psychological and anthropological views to my interpretation of the Heroides. This does not mean that I believe that ancient poets, and in this case Ovid, described reality or produced literature by relying on and being aware of our same categories. By contrast, these categories have always existed somehow, but have been given a definition, or alternatively, have been problematized only in more recent years, after many centuries these works originated. This is why the use of modern theory to look at ancient texts not only can be justified, but may contribute to a deeper understanding and interpretation of these texts. Now, coming back to the main body of the talk. Building on Fulkerson 2005, one of these three main works from which I draw, I interpret the Heroides as an example of écriture féminine, which gives expression to female voices in spite of the male voice behind them. These epistles, or some passages of them, thus, represent an enclave, a sort of Horatian Angulus, within a wider patriarchal-based context, in which femininity takes a subversive attitude against the symbolic space established by a sort of Lacanian law of the fathers. This results in a temporary recreation of a new language and an autonomous space for the female voice, a room of one sound in Virginia Woolf's words. This subversion is operated through various recurrent patterns, among which the most remarkable are a constant reversal of roles between, e.g., male-female, elegiac poet puella, lover beloved, and so on, as well as a certain amount of irony or ambiguity in the production of the speech, that in this case is the written text. This is intended to break or to challenge the norms established by the pre-existing literary tradition and the contemporary historical context. Given this frame, I maintain that in Heroides 12, gender fluidity, rejection of traditional binary categories, and heteronormativity, as well as the construction of androcentric discourse, appear more clearly and patently than elsewhere in the collection. This epistle is staged as a letter written by Medea after she has been abandoned by Jason and has just heard that he's going to marry Creusa. As argued by some scholars, therefore, this Medea is suspended between different genres and different times, past, present, and future. Ovid has positioned his elegiac heroine between past and future, guilt and innocence, epic and tragedy. Medea's epistle to Jason is the only literary artifact preserved from antiquity in which the mature, demonic Medea of Euripides' play speaks with the same voice as the young, sympathetically engaging Medea of Apollonius Rhodes' Argonautica. The Medea of Heroides 12, therefore, appears as a liminal character, as she is in a threshold space between past and present, epic and tragedy, masculinity and femininity, barbarity and civility, youth and maturity, naivety and power, weakness and violence, maternal love and infanticide. As each heroine of the collection, she represents a coincidence of opposite thoughts and behaviors. But as I shall show, this coincidentia oppositorum seems, in a particular case, even more enhanced. In order to examine and uncover and explore the angles of the Ovidian Medea, I base my reading of Heroides 12 on psychological categories, as I mentioned, cognitive approaches, as well as feminist theory. In particular, I draw from Braidotti's rhizomatic or nomadic subject. This concept is partly deduced from the Lewis and Guattari's theory of the rhizome, but is merged with Irigary's theory of sexual difference, and therefore reinterpreted according to a feminist perspective. By looking at some passages of the epistle, thus, I demonstrate how Medea's oscillation between feminine and masculine attitudes may be interpreted as psychological androgyny. I will argue then that such psychological androgyny is partly responsible for Medea's dissonant behavior towards herself, Jason, and their children. Finally, I will show that this dissonance is resolved through a process of change, becoming, and autopoiesis, which the heroine accomplishes by deconstructing and reconstructing their subjectivity as well as self-identity. So let's look at point 1 on your handout now. Heroides 12 has been said to be the epistle characterized by the most abrupt beginning, that is, the adversative conjunction at. This opening polemically recalls the opposition between the help Medea provided to Jason in the past and the fact that he has abandoned her and is now marrying Creusa. Actually, it also reminds of the opening of Book 4 of the Aeneid at Regina Gravi, that is, of course, referred to Dido. The heroine, indeed, maintains that she remembers Memini, line 1, that she could find time to help Ferretopen, line 2, Jason through her arse. The word points primarily at Medea's magic skills, but alludes also to another kind of art, i.e. the art of love, which, however, in Ars Amatoria, Book 3, lines 29-42, the heroine does not possess. Ovid says at line 42, Deufit ars vobis, arte perennat amor. It's a passage in which he's talking about Ariadne, Phyllis, Dido, and Medea, and this saying these heroines had unfortunate love relationships because they were not able to learn the art of love. Medea continues by mentioning that she would prefer to have been dead instead of undergoing the sufferings and humiliation which she has to endure now. Such a widespread theme is enunciated in this passage through a metaphor referring to the 3 goddesses of fate, the sorores of line 3, who were taught to regulate the course of human life. They are often depicted as weaving a thread which represents the life of each individual. And indeed, pointing at this imaginary, Medea claims that they should have unwound their spindle, i.e. decreed their own death, precisely when Jason was asking for help, line 4, tunc debuerant fusos evoluissemes. Beyond being a common metaphor for human life, the idea of weaving is also connected to literary work and more generally to storytelling, as it is patently shown in, for instance, Metamorphosis 1-4, Perpetuum deducit Carmen is the most famous example, I think, in Latin literature. The reference to the spinning, line 4, for instance, fusos evoluisse, then may be understood as a two-tiered allusion which hints at the same time at Medea's life and letter. In other words, the unfolded spindle may represent not only the course of life, but also the course of a narration. Given that Medea is the author of a letter, she's somehow constructing not only her own story, but also her life. Her authorial writing, thus, seems to empower her with the possibility to reconstruct her self-identity and to reassess the importance of the role she plays both in her literary and real story. Medea, in fact, is aware that in Potentia, she's a narratable self, and their identity has been progressively built on and has developed as a result of her life experience. The subjective writing of the epistle changes this potential narrative text in an actual written text. The letter represents, therefore, the result of a recollection of previous facts and events, which were kept in Medea's memory, but have acquired concreteness and reality through the heroine's writing. Memory has stimulated the narrative impulse which has given birth to the text. This process can be fruitfully explained through the words of Arianna Cavarero, a feminist philosopher dealing with women's subjective writing and narrativity. And you have the most relevant passages, point 2 on your handout, which I am going to read with my nice British pronunciation. Although she's immersed in this tale, the narratable self is not, however, the product of the life story which the memory recounts. She coincides rather with the uncontrollable narrative impulse of memory that produces the text and is captured in the very text itself. As we know, the contents of this text are necessarily discontinuous, fragmentary, fleeting, and even casual, because the weaving work of memory is itself discontinuous, fragmentary, fleeting, and casual. The effect of a life story always consists in a reification of the self that crystallizes the unforeseeability of the existent. My pronunciation is not good, but these words were very difficult as well. Discontinuity, accident, and fluctuation are in fact usual patterns of the writing style as well as contents of the Heroides, and may be seen as the result of the impulsive and uncontrolled force of narration. The life stories of the heroines, and in this particular case of Medea, materialize the unpredictability of their evolution and self-development, which has led them to reshape their destiny in life. Life and writing thus coincide in their being unfixed, undetermined, as well as in a constant change and redefinition. The redefinition of a self-identity is in fact the fil rouge running throughout Heroides 12. In lines 5-6, at point 1 of your handout, for instance, Medea exclaims that if she had not helped Jason, she could have died well as Medea, line 5, and that the rest of her life from that moment on has been characterized by punishment and expiation, line 6. By mentioning her name for the first time, the heroine seems to start her quest for a self-definition, which she will reach in the course of the letter. If the heroic death Medea is looking for is the first proof of her adoption of a male epic-based perspective, at the same time, this addressing to and talking with herself by a given name may hint at the self-definition which characterizes the whole epistle. Let's look at point 3 on your handout now. After mentioning the arrival of the Argonauts in Colchis, Medea wishes death on Jason with accents which echo the regretful tones of the opening lines of the epistle we have just seen. The heroine prospects a different outcome, imagining what would have happened if Jason had not received her help for the trials. If Jason indeed had fought the bullocks and the warriors generated by the seeds, line 17-18, non praemedicatus, line 15, he would not have survived and Medea would have avoided many troubles. Quantum perfidiete cum scelerate perisset, dempta fora incapiti, quam mala multa meo, lines 19-20. The adjective premedicatus is probably an Ovidian hapax and hints at Medea's magic arts, herbs, and potions. In these lines, the heroine is somehow presented as the Medea of the tradition, i.e., as a potentially very dangerous magician. Accordingly, by mentioning the help she gave to Jason, and she regrets having given, Medea points out immediately that such support has been necessary to make Jason overcome the trials and eventually gain his heroic status. The reference to the trials will recur obsessively throughout the epistle as a leitmotif, or better, as a sort of refrain. Having helped Jason with the trials is certainly a reason of regret for Medea. At the same time, however, this is also her greatest merit and what she has made the heroine play an active role in Jason's and their own story. The continuous and repeated reference to the trials, then, is a way to emphasize Medea's activeness and power, and conversely to underline Jason's passivity, dependency, and lack of heroic temper. Medea's epistle, however, is not only about rebuking Jason and reducing his status, but is especially about condemning herself for her own weakness and naivety. Medea's complaining attitude at the beginning of the epistle, which reflects the role of abandoned woman she plays according to the patterns of the genre collection itself, is always accompanied by and interwoven with a powerful and manly way of acting and behaving. Such a fluctuating attitude is therefore one of many expressions of Medea's psychological androgyny, which is a concept coined firstly by Sandro Bem in 1974, and this is still used in developmental psychology, so it's still very relevant also in psychological studies. If Medea can be said to be an example of gender self-division in Euripides, this division of the self, although it is present, is also clear in Heroides 12. Feminine and masculine selves continuously overlap, sometimes coincide. Medea's acts cannot be attributed to a gender, or if they can, this attribution is never definitive. Medea's attitudes may be seen, in fact, in different lights and perspectives. If the perspective changes, they acquire a new value. As another example of this, let's look at lines 93 and following, which you have as point 4 on your handout. Here, the heroine tells about the bronze-footed bulls, Euripides Tauros, line 93, and the warriors born from the seas Jason himself assaulted, line 96. Although she gave some magic potions to Jason, Medea confesses that she was still concerned about the outcome of the events, line 97, ipsa ego pallida sedi, she says, especially after seeing that the men suddenly rising from the seas were holding arms, line 98. At line 97, through the relative Quid medicamina, Medea points out the help she offered to Jason, while playing the role of a woman who passively looks at her man while he is performing heroic deeds. Medea is also implying that the very reason for Jason's success are her magic filters and potions. Accordingly, Medea is somehow depicting herself, again, as the actual hero, since without her assistance, Jason would have never been able to accomplish his mission and get the Golden Fleece. Because of Medea's magic intervention, in fact, the warriors born from the seeds start fighting and killing each other instead of attacking Jason, and you have this at line 99, 100. The heroine then manages to link again Jason's success to her own intervention, depicting herself as the actual person responsible for having accomplished the trials and gained the fleece. Medea's help to Jason, however, is not only an expression of male decisional power and activeness, but also the result of a typically feminine arts, in this case magic. Medea's intervention, moreover, is what provides her with the status of a hero, but at the same time is the stream of her falling in love with Jason. These and other attitudes or actions, which we cannot explore for reasons of time, but the epistle is plenty of them. So these attitudes are psychic and literary embodiments of the mythological character of hermaphrodite, and they encourage non-binary interpretations of Medea's psychology and, in more general terms, human psychology, behavior, and sexuality. So the first part of the paper is over. Now I will move to the second part, which is going to be shorter than the first one. So we are getting there. Okay? In the second part of my paper, yes, I shall demonstrate how the application of the category of cognitive dissonance to Medea's attitudes can be linked to her psychological androgyny. To do this, I will take into account some lines from which I argue Medea's cognitive dissonance emerges more clearly. Before moving on with the close reading, however, it is worth specifying in which terms we can talk about dissonant behavior in relation to Medea. And I really would like to clarify that I had this part read by a friend of mine who is doing his PhD in cognitive science in Paris, so it should be, you know, at least reasonable what I say, from a psychological point of view at least. Dissonance is in fact another way to refer to an inconsistency between behavioral, psychic, cognitive, cultural, environmental, and so forth elements, which individuals try to overcome by reducing its magnitude, i.e. the patterns which make these elements so discrepant. According to Festinger, who coined this definition for the first time in 1957, particularly when such dissonance concerns very significant elements, people seek to correct their behaviors, or more rarely, the environmental patterns, in order to make these elements more consistent. Dissonance, then, may arise on different occasions and according to various patterns. Although dissonance has been said to be an everyday condition, in most cases it may arise when new events happen or new information, quote, become known to a person, creating at least a momentary dissonance with existing knowledge, opinion, or cognition concerning behavior, unquote. And this is still Festinger, 1957. If we apply this definition to Medea, it appears that her cognitive dissonance has already happened, at least partly, at the time she's writing the epistle, and was caused by Jason's abandonment and perspective new wedding with Cruza. Jason's abandonment and betrayal are the new elements which come up. From them, Medea has realized that her falling in love with Jason was a mistake, which the heroine strongly rejects and deplores, as we saw. The way in which Medea overcomes the dissonance she has appreciated is characterized by a change in her attitudes. This leads her to a process of self-development and becoming, which will be accomplished progressively within the letter. This process is enacted through different phases: acknowledgement of the new reality after a recollection and reconsideration of previous events, adjustment to the new situation, adoption of a behavior which represents a reaction to the new situation in order to get a new consonance. As an example of this, let's look at Medea's falling in love, which is reported in detail at line 5561, which you have as point 5 on your handout. This description increases the perception of the heroine's split and dissonant self. By recalling her naivety and lack of rationality, Medea is not only enjoying a sort of voluptas dolendi, but is also making clear, first of all to herself, the reasons why she's going to make the decisions and undertake the actions which will lead her to become Medea and resolve her internal struggle, that are the mother of Cruza and their own children. Before reaching that stage, however, Medea recalls her past by describing how she was concerned with Jason's safety after she had met him. The heroine refers to her lack of sleep and to her nocturnal cries, which you find at line 57-58. Beyond recalling her elegiac topoi, this reference is aimed at introducing the actual reason why Medea was concerned, i.e. the horrible trials Jason had to overcome, lines 59-60. As mentioned, the trials recur obsessively within the epistle, but in this case they are described as a vision, as though Medea is suspended between a conscious status and an unconscious one, characterized by dreams and alienation. This sense of suspension is enhanced in the following line, where Medea states that on the one side she is affected by love, and on the other side is used by fear. This fear waiver boosts her passion, which is line 61, Inc amorim timorest ipsum timora auget amorem. The concerns about the trial forecast the active intervention of Medea, who immediately arranges a meeting with Jason. Jason's words and false promises persuade her. At lines 89-90 in the epistle, which you don't have in the handout, but it's not crucial for what I'm going to say, Medea defines herself as a simplex puella, underlining not only her inexperience in law, but presumably also her inexperience in plotting, while plotting and planning will become intrinsic components of her future self. In other words, the hero implicitly remarks that the Medea who fell in love with Jason is not the Medea who is writing at the present moment, as she is undergoing a process of change. These lines, thus, give us a picture of Medea's attitudes as inconsistent and conflicting. The internal conflict is developed throughout the epistle and will be resolved through the achievement of what I will define as a nomadic self-identity. As mentioned in Heroides 12, Medea is suspended between different genres, times, feelings, attitudes. This increases the discrepancy within herself, but is also what causes her violent and resolute reaction. However, the element which actually intensifies her internal dissonance and catalyzes her vengeance is represented by her motherhood, and more particularly in this text, by the abrupt appearance of her children. The presence of Medea's children reinforces the discrepancy between what she originally expected from her union with Jason and their current situation, between her previous inexperience and their more recent action, i.e. the murder of her brother and Peleus, between her motherhood and her thirst for revenge. Medea's psychological androgyny contributes to enhancing this inconsistency, as the male heroic self, concerned with Timea, the Greek reputation, opposes to the female maternal instinct. At the same time, however, her female proclivity towards magic and plotting helps her to accomplish her vengeance. Cognitive dissonance and multidimensional, multigendered psychology lead her to a new phase of her life, writing and subjectivity, which, as observed, are interwoven. Let's look at point 6 of your handout now. At lines 143-144, the hero hears the wedding songs coming from outside. As Medea said, that is marriage between Jason and Cruz, of course. As Medea's servants don't want to reveal her the truth and cry in silence, line 145-146, and the heroine herself is not willing to inquire more about what is happening, she asks one of her children to look at the scene. By using an expression which ironically recalls the contrario, the famous Virgilian Meminisse Iuabit, book 1 from the Aeneid, and the expression is 147, Potius Nescio Iuabat, Medea stresses how painful may be the knowledge of some circumstances and how it would be better if they remained unknown, according to a widespread topos in classical literature. At the same time, the heroine is hinting at her acuteness and intelligence, as well as awareness of situations, which, however, have also led her to discover inconvenient and unpleasant truths. The heroine in this passage, and many others within the letter, looks at herself and her subjectivity with a mixture of pride and resentment. Medea's sensitiveness is further enhanced in the following line, where the heroine states that although she consciously did not know what was happening exactly, she felt sad, mens mea tristis erat, 148, as though she had a sort of premonition. Medea's sinister sensation is not only another proof of her exceptional nature, but represents her difficulty in acknowledging the reality. Jason's wedding is in fact the new element, which causes to her a cognitive dissonance, by putting her in front of a choice. The perspective that Jason is marrying Cruza is indeed highly unpleasant for Medea, who tries to avoid facing this reality. Once the marriage, i.e. the new element, has occurred and she cannot avoid acknowledging it, the heroine finds herself in front of a cognitive inconsistency. She used to love Jason, but he has abandoned and now betrayed her. So the love she used to feel for him has now changed into hatred. This dissonance, then, is overcome by reducing or annihilating one of the two discordant elements, i.e. the law for Jason. The complete Aufhebung, the overcoming of this cognitive dissonance, however, is enacted when Medea will have realized how to take revenge of Jason, i.e. by killing Crusa, but particularly their children, which is point 7 on your handout. Viderit iste Deus qui nunc mea pectora versat, Nescio quid Certe mens mea Maius Agit. Basically, she says, the God who is now agitating my heart shall see these things. I don't know what greater thing my mind is surely planning. The last lines of Heroides 12, therefore, represents the final moment of transition for the heroine. Medea not only has coped with her cognitive dissonance by making an element, hatred adjacent or vengeance, overcome the other, motherhood, but she has also enacted a process of becoming, which is also due to her psychological progeny and has led her to reshape her identity. As we have seen, this process of restructuring of the self may bring about fluctuation, instability, as well as inconsistency, and ultimately produce a conflict between subjectivity or self-perception and reality. However, fluctuations, psychological androgyny, and cognitive dissonance are not obstacles to be overcome, but phases through which Medea has accomplished her self-development. This ultimately does not consist of an achievement of a fixed status, but of a continuous process of transformation. Medea's process of becoming, therefore, may be interpreted in the light of Bradotti's concept of nomadic or rhizomatic subject, and here we have one of the many definitions. Hence the importance of thinking difference so as to disengage it from the reactive pole of a binary opposition which is organized to affirm dialectically the power and primacy of the same. The nomadic subject as a non-unitary entity is simultaneously self-propelling and hetero-defined or outward bound. All becomings are minoritarian, that is to say, they inevitably and necessarily move into the direction of the others of classical dualism, displacing them and re-territorializing them in the process, but always and only on a temporal basis. Now I put a piece regarding difference here, because in this way you may notice the fact that actually Bradotti is drawing from Irigary's theory of sexual difference, which actually makes a subject establish itself, a famous subject actually establish herself. On the basis of Bradotti's theory, Medea's femininity can be said to become, and I'm quoting from Bradotti again here, the force that can break the eternal return of the same and its classical others. Rhizomatic thinking encourages each subject to empower him or herself as a multiplicity and along multiple axes. And furthermore, these patterns of becoming can be visualized alternatively as sequential modes of affirmative deconstruction of the dominant subject position, masculine, white, heterosexual, speaking external language, property owing, urbanized, or else as stepping stones to a complex and open-ended process of depersonalization of the subject. This process, thus, is not bound to end, but represents precisely the way in which Medea defines her unstable and unfixed subjectivity. Coping with her cognitive dissonance does not aim at resolving completely this dissonance, but the aim is represented by the attempt itself. The target is in fact precisely the process of becoming, not the achievement of a stable identity. As I hope to have demonstrated thus, the actual achievement is the non-achievement, the non-heteronormativity, the non-binary identity. This consists of Medea's negation and simultaneously total acceptance and embracement of her double or multiple self. Remaining or becoming Medea is a leitmotif which characterizes the entire life of this mythological figure, especially within Latin literature. Uncovering her identity or constructing a new heroic one represents a challenge which never finds a stable resolution. Thank you for your attention and patience.
Okay.
Sorry, it was a bit shorter, I realized, but this is okay.
Yeah, it's okay.
Friday evening.
It's okay.
It's Friday evening, it's okay.
Not to worry, not to worry. Okay, well, thank you very much for a lovely talk, Simona. We will now first say goodbye to the YouTube channel before asking the audience for some questions or comments? Is it stopped?